Hello, I'm Thomas Hare, Chief Content Officer of the Performance-Driven Marketing Institute, a not-for-profit trade association that serves companies in the performance and direct-to-consumer marketing world. Welcome to the latest episode of Take 20, created by the PDMI's Brand Response Council. These 20-ish minute live conversations featuring leaders in the performance marketing world speaking about the hottest topics in the industry are scheduled twice a month. Before we get to today's conversation, quick housekeeping note, we'll be addressing any questions from the audience at the end of the session, but you don't have to wait to ask them. Utilize the questions tab on your control panel to type and send your question in. We'll be collecting them, and we'll try to get to as many as possible in the final moments of the episode. Today, we pick up from a conversation that was featured at PDMI West in San Diego last fall about the booming podcast and digital audio space. Brand Response Council Chair and Take 20 host Chris Foster of Modern Postcard is here, and he welcomes podcast and digital audio measurement expert and consultant David Shiffman, as well as Warner Brothers Discovery sales side leader Peter Duborg, chat about the market that's expected to top $2.5 billion in ad spend in 2025, and that's podcast alone. If you're a podcast listener and you know D2C and performance advertisers are huge players in the space, how are outlets effectively partnering with performance brands? How are they providing the kind of ad metrics marketers need to properly measure our ROAS? Well, Chris, David, and Pete hope to deliver answers to those questions and more. Welcome, everybody. Chris, take it away.
Great. Thank you so much. And really welcome in David and Peter. So glad you could be here for your first Take 20s. We're super excited. And this is episode 108. So welcome into everyone and happy almost spring to our folks, especially on the East Coast. Like Tom said, podcasts are becoming more mainstream and advertisers are paying attention. Although it's still a smaller share of the digital audio ad dollars, it's a chunk of advertising spend and it's growing. Brands are discovering the value of both podcast and digital audio in a lot of ways because they can find a niche. When you find your niche within a trusted content block, it gives brands the opportunity to directly engage kind of with a circle of trust and with authenticity with their customers listening to that podcast. So I'll give you a good example. I listened to the Rich Roll podcast, and he speaks about 8 Sleep Mattress or AG1 Nutrition. It's really this interesting direct connection between the listener, the host, the content, and the brands themselves. And there's a nice alignment that can be found within the podcast space. So as brands continue to diversify their media, they're looking for ways to more authentically connect with their audience. This channel seems to be ideal. In addition, digital audio is kind of this new broadcast radio, and it gives brands the chance to talk to more audience as users shift their media preference and go to some of these digital audio and digital streaming platforms. So we're going to talk about all of it. I think, Peter, we're going to start with you. And the question I have is, what has surprised you most about podcast advertising as you've seen it adjust and change?
Thanks, Chris. Thank you, Tom and John and David. Great to be here. Appreciate you guys having us. So yeah, I would say for me, I didn't get into the podcasting space till about 5-6 years ago or so. And the biggest, there's been a ton of change. I would say like the biggest surprise for me overall has been the connection with our audiences and our fans that our hosts and that we have with our content. If you think about CNN and CNN audio, really our mission has always been to inform, engage, and empower. And I think we do a good job overall at CNN of informing, kind of, this is just my opinion, but kind of a middle of the road job on engagement and a not so great job on empowerment. And podcasts and digital audio are a really great way to drive engagement and empowerment. And same goes for our sports and entertainment content like Turner Classic Movies and their podcast, The Plot Thickens. We have HBO podcasts. The companion series right now for The White Lotus is doing great. And we have the Steam Room for sports with Charles Barkley and Ernie Johnson. So you can imagine there's some pretty great connections there. And that is, without a doubt, the number one thing that has blown me away the most, I would say, for sure.
So I'd love you to elaborate on that, Peter. You said kind of in the CNN space, there was good engagement, but fair to middling empowerment, wherein with podcasts, a strong engagement and strong empowerment. Can you help to define for our audience what you mean by between engagement versus empowerment?
Yeah, sure. Anytime, Chris. So For instance, we have a partner of ours who's been a sponsor of Chasing Life, the Chasing Life podcast for a long time. And they're really engaged with working with the brand across all screens. And you've seen good success with Dr. Sanjay Gupta, who's the host of the podcast, talking about different things. I'm not going to mention the brand specifically, but talking about different things that connect with their KPIs, and he's really doing it organically, editorially, just based on wellness and health, and it really makes for an engaged audience, and for sure, the advertisers are excited about that, and I think look no further than today. If you pull up one of our podcasts, it'll be talking about everything that went down last night, with the State of the Union, and it's for sure a really a fascinating time, and a great way to stay engaged is with podcasts.
Excellent. You just mentioned about some of the KPIs. I think that I'd like to switch to you, David. What kind of KPIs are most associated with this channel? For example, we're familiar with PPC or organic, where they're looking at cost per click, or with Facebook, you're looking at impressions, or cost per impressions, or click-throughs, et cetera. What are those essential key performance indicators within podcasts?
Yeah, and thanks for having me here. Good to be here and part of this conversation. I mean, I think for sure, you think about podcasts and you think about the growth it's had and it continues to have, that performance orientation for advertisers and thinking about driving behaviors is definitely paramount, right? Being able to drive people to a website, be able to drive people further downstream and driving leads and driving conversions in the digital world. So that's definitely a focus and a key area. That being said, I think one of the real compelling and interesting things about the space in particular is the expansion of objectives and how you think about podcasting, right? So it's sort of moved from, digitally centric only KPIs and cost per acquisition, and the ROAS and ROI for sure, but being able to also drive offline, right? Getting people to purchase products in stores and in other environments as well. And I think the third thing that is I find really interesting when we think about the objectives and the KPIs for podcasts, it's not just a performance medium. It's really not. And I think more and more advertisers are starting to look at it as an opportunity to engage with the right audiences, tell brand stories in long form content, long form opportunities, and really building this brand and audience relationship that drives consideration, belief in the brand, and interest in the brand. Ultimately, yes, we want to convert people for sure, but I think it is a really unique medium and a really unique opportunity that it can work up here and it can work down at the bottom of the funnel. And more and more marketers are looking at how they combine that perspective and do it, and podcasting is absolutely delivering in that regard.
I love your perspective on that, David, where you talk about the marketer expanding their mindset of the objectives, right? Expanding what they think this thing can do, right? And the podcast is actually a really intimate space. Usually people are listening on their speakers, or they're listening on their headphones. They're going for a walk or exercising or cleaning house or whatever. And it's a moment where people are taking time for themselves, listening to something that they're interested in. And there's an intimacy there in terms of their paying attention to the content and paying attention to those brands. So I like it that you mentioned that it's not just performance based. It's also developing relationships and developing an emotional connection with the brand.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, Chris, to the earlier conversation, what Peter was talking about is that attention, that passion, that intensity of how people listen to the content and how that transfers and translates over into the advertising experience as well, which I think is super surprising to some extent. Just the level and how that sort of runs across is been pretty interesting.
And the passion, I get it. So I guess I'll ask you, Peter, what kind of brands or industries does then this work for? Is it every brand? Is it selective? Or which brands or industries should probably avoid it because it's not quite the right fit?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think, same as David's seeing, we're seeing success with both performance and branding clients. Give you an example. Recently, we had a health app that was a sponsor for CNN's election coverage across all screens, including CNN audio. And we found, just through the brand lift study, that the metric for audio was through the roof for all the typical things that you would tick off, for brand lift, like intent to purchase, that kind of thing, or download in this case. And I think, for CNN, we have a lot of categories like finance and B2B that really love our thought leadership pods, that kind of stuff. I know for Turner Classic Movies, the healthcare category has been strong, and also the finance. For sports, a lot of auto, retail. So it's really, both performance and branding, and the combination of both we see clients looking for nowadays.
I like that. David, do you have an opinion on that?
Yeah. If you're a brand that wants to connect with audiences in the right context and where they are engaged, attentive, and where you have opportunities, it is a medium for you, which is literally every single brand in every single category. I think I think what's really important there is that brands need to go in thinking about what the opportunity in fact is and how to think about this unique channel in the right way. It's not about throwing your video ad and converting it to an audio ad, right? It's really being able to think about your objectives, what you're trying to do against which audiences, and have the right strategy and lean in and do it and test it properly and learn and grow with it. I think the other thing, if you go back 4 years, 5 years, where podcasting was a little bit more niche, right? It was a smaller audience. What's happened now is it's a scale play too, right? So it isn't just about niche brands, niche products. It's about that and larger brands that are looking to scale their business, reach a lot of people, and kind of do it. So it really does play, I think, in a lot of different areas, but you got to think about it the right way.
Sure. It is interesting too, because in the Wayback Machine, there would be some talk show hosts that were these large superstars, right? National stars of, radio programs that millions of people will tune into. And that's kind of shifted now, where you have, podcast hosts who have millions of followers and devoted folks. And then the brands can tack on with that. And so that's on the podcast side, but there's also digital audio. So I guess, Peter, I'd like to ask you, is there at WB, do you guys have a different approach or mentality when you talk about digital audio versus just specifically podcasts?
Chris, when you say digital audio, are you talking like inclusive of like streaming music and stuff like that?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah. It's so funny because, I get in the car, with my soon to be 20-year-old, he'll be 20 tomorrow. And if he's driving around,
Happy birthday.
Yeah.
Drive safely.
He's if he's driving, sometimes I don't even know if he's basically streaming music or podcast the whole time, and it's like, I don't even, not to talk bad about radio or anything, but I don't even know if he can find a radio station sometimes, So it's so prevalent for young people, and I think for us, we're really more in the podcast space. So I wouldn't want to advise too much on either, but it's I think on either or, I should say. But for podcast, I think it's definitely about bringing that content to life in that long form, intimate format that we've been talking about. Hopefully that's helpful.
Sure. David, what are you thinking?
Yeah, so a couple thoughts there. I think one is, I'm a big proponent of this, I'll call it cross-platform audio, and thinking about all the opportunities, whether it's radio or streaming or podcast. So I think it's really important that marketers think through that lens. One of the, more specifically within kind of streaming audio, music, et cetera, versus podcast. I think one of the things for me that's really important is understanding how consumers are coming to that content, what they're looking for, right? What are their desires? What are their needs? And not to get too deep into that, but I always sort of look at streaming can be a really powerful marketing opportunity for sure, but it's a little bit more of a lean back experience, right? You're listening to music, it's different. Podcast is lean in, right? It's this unique immersive content that's a little bit different. So I think parking the mechanics of buying and selling, et cetera, but I think really thinking about what consumers are coming in to the channel to do and to get, and self-improvement, learning, depth of content, depth of experience, and the relationships they have with the hosts and the content. It's just a little bit different in terms of how you want to think about your messaging, your strategy, and how you can leverage it to its full extent, in addition to streaming and other forms of audio. But it is, to me, it's a different consumer experience, and we should respect that and take advantage of it as marketers.
And treat it differently. No, I love that distinction. That's excellent nuance, David, because as an advertiser, you can advertise in both, but your message and your approach and the actual ad itself might be different. If my she's going to be 24, right? Peter, she doesn't know what a radio station is. She just built into the Nissan that she just purchased is all the Sirius XM or other streaming HD streaming services. So that's where she goes. It's built into the car, right? So that's what she's listening to. And yeah, there's this passive background noise when she's driving around, when she's listening to music versus a story or a content where she's leaning in. That's a wonderful descriptor and an image, David, of leaning back versus leaning in. That's a great contrast. So this is awesome. We're at the 20-minute mark. I'd like to wrap up kind of a final question for both of you. Peter, do you think that this channel grows alongside the same rate as programmatic, or does this have a faster or different growth rate in the upcoming years?
Yeah, I think you're going to continue to see growth for digital audio and podcast overall for sure. And I think programmatic in this space, I'd love to hear David's take too. I think programmatic in this space is going to be bigger and bigger. DAI and pixel-based attribution are really key for that. And we need to make sure that we don't lose that personal connection when it comes to programmatic. But I think there are a lot of great shows that are doing a good job of that already. And I know we talk about that a lot internally. So I think programmatic will be a big part of the future for podcasts, especially, and digital audio. But yeah, I expect to see just growth overall for sure.
Yeah, I fully agree. I think we're going to see continued growth in podcasting, advertising. I think some of that's going to be direct, and I think we're going to continue to see more growth in programmatic. It's how people want to buy media. It has data targeting as well as cross-platform publisher, frequency management and those sorts of things, right? And I think we're just going to continue to see complementary growth is how I kind of think about it, right? It's not a fight, it's both. And again, I think podcast is still early days, right? And we're going to continue to see
early days. It's interesting. I actually thought that the market itself got a whole lift during this past election cycle because as a vehicle for the candidates, it was actually given more attention, right? There was news cycles about the fact that they were on podcasts that actually had made podcasting even, shine brighter, right, as a media and as a channel, because there was a lot of media about that media spend.
No question, Chris. Absolutely, and seemed to have like a big impact, on the election overall. Pretty incredible.
Yeah, I think that I would not be surprised if in the upcoming election cycles, both midterm and the next one in 4 years, that you'll see even more of this, and that you have these surrogate spokespeople that people trust, because everybody knows the trust of government is at an all-time low. Conversely, the trust of following podcast hosts or personalities or people that you trust now is an all-time high, right? People are choosing, and I think the American consumer base are looking for people and organizations to trust, right?
Absolutely agree. Absolutely, Chris. No doubt.
That's such an interesting idea. You guys got me thinking that one thing about this channel that is the underpinning of it all is trust, right? You trust the host and you trust the brand, and consumers are looking and seeking, wanting to trust now. That's interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. Trust goes hand in hand with belief and believing in that your news source and the host and the truth of it all, I guess, or their opinion of it in some cases. So yeah, they go hand in hand. I couldn't agree more.
Yeah, we want to believe, right? Human beings want to believe, and they want to be rewarded for their belief. All right, we could wax on philosophically about this for hours, but we don't have the time. Instead, we've got some questions from the audience. Tom, what do you got?
We do. We have a good active audience today, so it means good stuff coming from you guys. Two questions kind of were similar in style and scope, and they're both kind of in the area of host reads. One of them was, in your experience, have you seen similar or even better response to host reads in podcasts versus traditional? The other being, can you speak about the difference in ROI to test produced ads versus host endorsements? Can you, either or both of you guys, kind of riff on anything you've seen there?
Sure, I'll jump in. Look, I think it's a both argument here, right? I think in the podcast space, given what we were just talking about in terms of trust and belief and believability and immersion of the audience, taking advantage of host read and host opportunities is a no-brainer, quite honestly, right? It really is. It really is. At the same time, if you're an advertiser and you seek to understand the podcast environment and you don't do things like, let's take a video ad and just edit it down and call it a podcast ad, and you actually think about creating the right brand content, it too can have effect. And I've seen both work incredibly well. I've seen both work in terms of just driving overall volume as well as ROI and ROAS. It's about understanding what works for your brand and finding the right host, the right branding, the right messaging to drive that. But to me, and I've seen this conversation a lot, it's like, well, we're only going to do that, or we're only going to do that. You're limiting yourself in terms of the opportunities, you're limiting yourself in terms of the scale, the reach, and all the things that this medium can actually do for you. So yeah, lean into the host, lean into that hard for sure, but it is not the only way to take advantage of podcasting.
Yeah, that's great, David. I'm glad you mentioned that. We have a lot of great opportunities for host read ads at WBD, but on the news side, it's all really producer read, just because our journalists are not gonna read ads. So we've had a lot of success with the producer read ads, and I think if you're listening to a podcast hosted by Sanjay Gupta, he's definitely an influencer in the health and wellness space, whether he is reading the ads or not. And I think that has a big impact, and we make sure that it's a voice that is familiar to the audience and the tonality of the show. And so we've had a lot of success with producer read, and host read ads I think are great as well. And I can certainly understand on the news side when you can't make that happen.
Great. Is the primary audience for podcast and audio streaming younger than average? Same? Older? Is there any trend there?
It's a mass medium, and I think it's easy to forget that sometimes, but it has become that. The growth has been across younger, older. It skews a little upper income, but like young audiences are listening, middle-aged audiences are, and we've seen great growth too from older audiences. I think one of the reasons, one, it's the kind of content, but if you think about all the diverse types of content that is available in podcasting today that caters to all the different audience profiles, that's what we're talking about. So it's not about older people, it's not only about younger people, it's all of this content that's out there that people can really easily access, that's driving it. So I would think about it as, understand who your audience is, and use the data and technology to find them in the podcasting space. And it's not sort of an older only or a younger only. It really is finding those opportunities and being smart about data, targeting, applications, and messaging to take advantage of what's there.
Great. One more, and I think this is timely because we've seen a lot of stuff about video podcasts, like podcasts that are actually on video as well, having a lot of strength and power. What's the interest like from brands compared to just a regular audio podcast? Is there any difference in response by the audience to ads on podcasts through video? Are advertisers excited about getting video ads in the podcast?
Yeah, I don't know, David, if you have anything that you've seen on that. For us, we're getting more into it. I would say on the sports side, we have more podcasts where there is a YouTube element, or maybe we'll do something live on air. I will say some of our biggest successes on the sports side for podcasts have been the live podcasts like that the team does at, say, like NBA All-Star or something along those lines, and then get a ton of engagement on YouTube as well. We've been growing it more on the audio side, so I'd love to come back soon and talk a little bit more about it when we have some more learnings. But I'd love to hear from David if he's got anything.
Yeah, predominantly on the same page. I haven't seen a direct, comparison of outcomes per se. I think down the road we'll start to be able to see that. At the same time, I think the content itself and I'm going to call it a listening experience, lends itself very well to audio and audio only, and I think we're going to continue to see that grow. I think one of the things that I believe and that I've seen is the way the podcast can be consumed when you're listening, and you're free to do some other things with your eyes, and you've got different kind of opportunities. You're doing, you're cooking, you're working out, you're doing different things. Doesn't mean that there's not a world for video podcasts as well, but I still think the predominant medium is audio, and take full advantage of it because it can be really, really powerful and really immersive. And Chris, you were talking about, right? Headphones in your brain, right? I mean, it is powerful. And again, I'm not saying there isn't great opportunity with video extensions, et cetera, but I really would lean into that audio first view.
Yeah, that's great. Oh, sorry, Chris, go ahead.
You.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I love how you put that, David. And one of the things I meant to add, which could go into each of the last couple questions, is we have a lot of clients that are interested in our podcast that reach cord cutters, reach people that actually don't have cable television, but are listening to the shows on their headphones, to David's point. That's something that we found to be really interesting as well. So I'm sorry, Chris, go right ahead.
No, I jumped in. I apologize. Also, what YouTube does is that as you push podcasts out, whether it's Apple, Spotify, or CNN or other apps, YouTube actually carries it as an audio file only. So there's video and audio. That's if someone just wants to listen to it and it's still a video podcast on YouTube, they can still listen to it as an audio. It gives the receiver, right, the person, the choice.
Anyway, well, hey guys, thank you for rejoining you. We really enjoyed this conversation. Very insightful, lots of good thoughts. Obviously, podcasts and digital audio is going to be something we continue to cover as it expands. As a Gen Xer, I listen to more podcasts than I think many other people do. I've got a wide array of interests, but perhaps I'm wrong. Perhaps there's a lot of people out there doing the same thing as me. And I will thank you, Chris, for when you had me on your podcast for not having video. Thank you.
I'll talk about that with David and Peter after this.
Anyway, thank you all of you for attending today. We appreciate it. Our next Take 20 episode is set for 2 weeks from today, Wednesday, March 19th, and we'll look at how consumers changing media consumption habits, aka podcasts, are affecting media spend by performance brands. Please visit thepdmi.com/take-20 to register for the webinar and check out the upcoming schedule. Of course, online registration for PDMI East, the association's 2025 spring event at Eden Rock, Miami Beach continues. Badges are just $395 for members, $595 for non-members. However, time for badge holders to get into our discounted hotel room block at Eden Rock, currently about 25% off the hotel's posted online prices, is running out tonight. That's right, the PDMI can only guarantee our rate of $339 per night to registrants through the end of the day today, March 5th. Keep an eye on your email. Hopefully we can extend that, but no guarantees. Only badge holders have access. Visit thepdmi.com/PDMI-East to get your badge in your hotel room now. Thank you again for checking out this episode of Take 20. Thanks, David. Thanks, Peter. Thanks, Chris. Be well. See you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.